Hello, podcast listeners. JJ Gordon, your host with the most here. Today's episode is about Pastor Dale Emery, a man who's been preaching for 59 years and retiring just shy of 60 years. Intriguing wisdom, sentiment, and also some regrets from a man who's been doing the same thing for 59 years. Plus, Tucker and I talk about famous stories from the Bible and how they relate to Star Wars. All of this and so much more on today's episode of JJ Meets World. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. This episode of JJ Meets World is brought to you by Natalie Deutsch of Hatch Realty. Natalie has a proven track record to get your home sold faster and for more money. She is consistently focused on her clients' needs and wants throughout the entire process and make sure that they are well taken care of. If you're looking to buy or sell, reach out to Natalie today. On average, Natalie sells a home every 3.74 days. That's at least 2 a week. And last year, Natalie earned her clients on average over $4,000 above list price on their homes. And you don't have to take our word for it. Here's some of the great reviews Natalie has received. I was overwhelmingly impressed with Natalie and all the Hatch team. She was very responsive and responded to all of the emails within an hour. She gave great advice and encouragement from the listing and pictures, the offer, and all the closing details. The marketing team knew exactly how to promote my property, and I was pleased by how soon and easily my property received an offer. I was actually dreading selling my condo, and Natalie did such an awesome job that I felt like I really didn't need to do anything. The thing I most appreciated was that she really listened to what I wanted to do and respected my decisions. I would definitely recommend Natalie and all the Hatch Realty team. They made this process so wonderful. That was from Diane. So listen, if you're in the mood to buy or sell a home, give Natalie a call right now. You can reach her at 701-388-9338. Natalie, Natalie, at hatchrealtyfm.com, or you can go to livefargomorehead.com. That's livefargomorehead.com and find out some information. Huge thanks to Natalie Deutsch of Hatch Realty for sponsoring JJ Meets World.
1, 2, 3, 4. JJ Gordon, sort of like that Indiana Jones, in that he's always sniffing out his next adventure. Yes, he is. He's always interviewing guests so he can have them on his show and they can talk about pop culture, arts, and leisure. JJ has his flag unfurled and he likes his french fries curled, and he's fun and then he twirls as he goes to meet the world. He will march into the rain even if his ankle sprain. Take a peek inside his brain. This podcast is called JJ Meets World.
Dr. Seuss quotes and the Jesus walking on the beach with you footprint story are the two most popular things to put on bookmarks. When I go into a kitschy gift shop, that's what I see there. Or, you know, occasionally it's the look of like a kitten with its paws over the end, so it looks like the kitten is hanging onto the page.
Just hang in there.
But for the most part, I think it's those Dr. Seuss quotes and then the footprints story. And I think what's unique about that is they both serve the same purpose. They're both teaching you something. It's a lesson you're supposed to learn. In the Dr. Seuss quotes, Dr. Seuss is teaching you about the fact that, you know, if I ran a zoo and it's about imagination, the Lorax is about environmental protection, the Butter Battle book is about the Cold War. They all have a deeper meaning to them. And then the footprint story, the meaning, of course, is, are you familiar with the footprint story?
Of course, yeah.
You probably have seen it on like a ceramic plate.
Right. It gets parodied with a Star Wars mix-up often, too.
Really?
The parody is usually along the lines of when it was like something like, you know, the original parable is once you only see like one pair of footprints.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
and then Obi-Wan says,
"Shan people walk in straight lines to hide their numbers."
Exactly. That's the one.
Well,
which is also a teachable moment. Also, a good story.
Really is. It's smart.
Yeah. The enemy is crafty.
So, full disclosure, I'm not a very religious person. I just don't feel like modern day churches speak to me in the needs that I have as a person. And I certainly do not like exclusion, which I think is what the church has really become in some facets. There's some that are about inclusion and rah, good for you. but the ones that are more about, no, well, we only want these people.
Right.
I find it to be hard to believe.
Right.
And a week doesn't go by when you don't read about some kind of church scandal. But I believe in community. And I think that churches are a place where people find community. It's people who wouldn't normally interact with each other. Maybe they are from opposite sides of town. They don't work together for a million reasons. Maybe they're older and then another couple is younger.
Right. People with shared interests congregate.
Right. And that's why they call it a congregation, right? And so I believe in the community of church. I think that's really important. I think it's important that people experience things and then judge them. So if you're somebody who says, I hate church, but you've never actually gone to church and you've never participated in like a potluck or something at a church, I find that to be hard to swallow in some regards. I remember the first time I interacted with a Mormon fellowship, and it was simply because I was hanging out at a friend's house. Their family were Latter-day Saints, and somebody in their church needed help moving. They were making a fast move. And so they gathered all of us kids up, and it was like, nope, we're going to go over there and help right now. And I saw, there's been 60 people who showed up. And all they had to do was activate the church calling tree. And that's the thing, is they were not there to worship. They did not have Bible study while hauling boxes. They were a community, and a community helped each other.
I believe that the term is fellowship, right?
It is. And I think in fellowship, I think it's a very specific term. And I think like J.R.R. Tolkien took the word fellowship to say this, to say that it was a group of people who came together to not just accomplish a task, but they came together to help each other. They came together to make each other stronger.
Right.
And that is what a church is supposed to do. A church is supposed to make you stronger. In this episode of JJ Meets World, we sit down with a pastor who has been preaching for 59 years.
That is nuts.
It is nuts. I think to myself, will I even be interested in anything I'm doing right now, 59 years, in 59 years, if I'm lucky enough to even be alive 59 years from now? But I think it's unique. And when you think about the changes in the world in 59 years, everything from political, economical, the changes that churches have gone through.
And these changes are gaining steam. I mean, this isn't like the same amount of change year after year.
Right.
It seems to double or quadruple.
I imagine when Pastor Dale started, you had to get a catalog that had books like funny jokes for pastors to tell. And today, a simple Google search and you can have a million jokes at your fingertips.
Puns for the pews.
You know what my favorite church joke is?
I don't.
One who farts in church sits in his own pew.
JJ Meets World.
We're taking the show on the road this week, and we're welcomed into a private residence. The first time ever we've been welcomed into a private residence, I think, right, Tucker?
Usually we have to sneak in.
And Pastor Dale Emery is our host as well as our guest this week. Pastor Dale, I met you through the Methodist Church down in Hillsboro. That's where my wife and her family attend church. And you have a pretty exciting milestone coming up in your career. You're going to retire for the fourth time?
Fourth time. I haven't learned how to retire before, but I think this time it's going to take.
So let's start at the beginning of your career and let's figure out how we got to hear the fourth retirement.
Okay. I was first licensed to preach in 1960, June 1st, 1960, in fact. So I've been in this business for 59 years to one degree or another. Initially, I was a lay pastor, and I served as a lay pastor when I was in college. Graduated with a degree in education from Southeast Missouri State, and I decided, I don't need to go to seminary. I'll just continue to serve both as a teacher and a pastor. Well, after a few years, I really knew that I needed to go to seminary. And so with my kids in junior high and elementary school, I had 3 kids. We picked up and went to Kansas City, where I was at St. Paul School of Theology. And I finished my degree there, my Master of Divinity degree, and then served for several years in Kansas. Through a convoluted set of circumstances, I got from Kansas to the Dakotas. It's so convoluted, probably nobody would want to listen to it.
I'm pretty sure our Red River Valley region listeners can tell from your accent that this wasn't your point of origin.
When I first came to North Dakota, my first pastorate was at Drayton, North Dakota. And they thought I had a really thick Southern accent. So every once in a while, I'd just kind of lay it on thick and give them a thrill. But
my dad is from Kentucky. And so when he moved up here in the early 80s, and he's been up here ever since, and he eventually lost the Southern accent, except when he's angry while driving, then I hear it. And when we go down south to see family in Kentucky is when
then it comes back.
Then the Southern comes out.
Yeah.
But, did you ever adopt a you betcha or anything like any of those upper Midwestern
really.
terms?
I did marry a full-blooded Scandinavian after I came to North Dakota.
Okay, that means you're allowed to stay.
She's a half Dane, a fourth Norwegian, and a fourth Swede. And that's good enough for me.
And I bet she's a fantastic cook. Those are great culinary countries.
Yep, and she's an excellent nurse. She was a registered nurse for 40 some odd years. And since has continued her outreach to elderly by being a caregiver, going into their homes and helping them with a bath or whatever.
You know, I hear people say this was the moment I heard my calling to serve in the church. Did you have a moment? Was there? Can you put your finger on an exact event that solidified this future for you?
I would say that the first indication of a calling that I had was when I was in high school. But I got out of high school, and instead of going on to college and then seminary, I decided that I would join the Navy. And so like Jonah, I ran away from God for a while. Then I got out of the Navy.
You kind of found yourself in the belly of a whale too, really, to some extent.
And then I spent several years trying to negotiate with God about how I could be both a school teacher and a pastor. But then it was in Charleston, Missouri, where I was teaching social studies in the high school, and I was a youth pastor at the church. And one Sunday morning I got up, and it was like God was speaking directly to me, saying, "You need to go to seminary, boy." And the rest is history, as they say.
You don't deny that calling.
No, sir, I do not.
What? So you find yourself in the Dakotas. Whereabouts in North Dakota have you had a chance to preach?
Well, I was in Drayton for 4 years, and then I went to Ashley, or as the Germans from Russia say, Ishley. And I was there 4 years, and then I went to Hartford, South Dakota, and then Webster, South Dakota, and then I went to Edgeley, North Dakota, and that's where I retired in 2004.
That's retirement number one.
Number one. I stayed fully retired for 2 years, and then I got a call asking if I would go to Enderlin, North Dakota, which is 120 miles from Grand Forks. And I said, boy, that's a long way to go. Well, they have a church car, I was told. And so I drove that church car back and forth for 2 years, and I retired a second time. I had said that I would serve for 2 years in Enderlin. And I was off for a month. I got another phone call asking me to go to New Rockford. And my response was, New Rockford is about the same distance as Interland from Grand Forks. And so the next words to me were, well, they have a parsonage and they want you to stay from Thursday to Sunday. And so finally I agreed. And then I was told, oh, by the way, you'll also be serving a little Lutheran congregation out in the country. So I became a Lutherist. Now that's better than a Methrin, you understand.
It's just like a Liger. Right.
I had two delightful congregations there. New Rockford United Methodist and Cavernous Lutheran Church. And if you don't think Cavernous was Scandinavian, there was hardly anybody in that church who wasn't either Norwegian or Swede.
A lot of fish at potlucks.
Yeah. And then I retired. Let's see, that would be number 3. And I got a phone call, and I didn't look at the phone to see who it was, but the voice on the other end, when I said hello, said, "You're not really going to retire, are you?" And I said, "Well, that's my intention." "Well, if I found a place for you that's closer to Grand Forks, would you go?" And it was Hillsboro. Now, actually, Hillsboro is a united parish. It has United Methodist and United Church of Christ members in there. Some of them don't know whether they're fish nor fowl, but
yeah.
But there are some who very much know that they're Methodists, and others who know very much that they're UCC. But I will have been there. Well, let's put it this way. I went there on July the 1st. July the 1st was my first Sunday in 2012. And next Sunday, June the 30th, will be a full 7 years that I will have been there. And that's my 4th and final retirement, I think.
So thinking ahead to that final sermon, what have you been writing it for the last
it's written
59 years?
It's written. I have scribbled and rewritten it. I've tried to get it so that it's perfect, and it probably isn't. But basically, I just want to talk about how I've had some great memories over the years, that I have thoroughly enjoyed my time in Hillsboro. And it's time to hang it up, though.
Yeah. I think sometimes it's difficult for people to address the idea of it's time to be done, especially when you enjoy what you're doing. I can tell that this isn't you deciding to be done because it's not fun for you anymore and it doesn't feel like service anymore, but it's time for that next generation to rise up.
I've had some health issues, though, that have spoken to me and said, it's time to retire. I had a heart attack in February, and I've had some problems with my legs for more than a year. And I just know that it's time for me to retire. I still am going to give some time and some service to Wesley United Methodist Church in Grand Forks. I will help out there as I can. I'm already working with a team to set up a visitation and hospitality group. But
so you're not really retiring. You're just changing the name.
Gears, maybe.
Yeah.
Shifting gears. Now, I shifted gears when I came from Kansas, where I was serving after I graduated from seminary. I had some sizable congregations that I served there. One of them, a church of about 1,000 members in Pittsburgh, Kansas. I also was director of a larger parish ministry in northeast Kansas. 9 churches. We had 4 pastors, a Christian education worker for that parish. And So I've had some sizable churches. All of my churches in North and South Dakota have either been small congregations or medium-sized congregations. And my ego is not hurt by the fact that I'm in a small or a medium congregation.
You know what I see is I see towns where the church is part of the heart of the town, but unfortunately we're seeing an era where less people are valuing that time at church and being part of that church community. Yeah. I see it in Hillsboro at the Methodist Church. Mm-hmm. You know, it's a beautiful church with a lot of pews, and I've never been in there once where I've had trouble finding a seat.
We had a couple of funerals that you would have had a problem.
Sure. Well, and Easter, I'm sure. Christmas,
Easter
those big ones.
Is a great time.
But do you think do you think it's the people? Do you think it's the church? What do you think is leading to some of the decline?
Well, I think there are some of the younger generation who see the church as being less relevant than their parents and grandparents did. And for example, in Hillsboro at United Parish, we have one family that has 3 kids. One is, one just graduated. One is going to be a junior in high school, and the other one is in elementary school. That's all the kids we've got. Now, when I went there in 2012, I tried to urge and encourage the leadership in that church to do some outreach and try to bring in some more people. And they said, just take care of us, Pastor. Most of us are past 65. Most of us will not go out and do visitation. And take care of us. And so that's what I've tried to do for 7 years, is take care of their needs.
Did you feel the same way in New Rockford and Ishley?
Well, every parish is different. In Ashley, my wife and I were both excited about the fact that they had a great mission consciousness. They were supporting missionaries in South America and in Africa and in the United States. In New Rockford, it was a church that was going to be closed at some point in the future. They made a decision in my last year there to close it, and they wanted to try to keep the church. What am I trying to think of? How to describe? There are beautiful stained glass windows in the church in New Rockford. They didn't want somebody to come in and bid on those windows and take them out and board it up. And so they made an agreement with the Dakota's Council for the Arts that's in New Rockford and has been for years. They do a wonderful job of putting on shows and teaching kids tap dance and all kinds of stuff.
I've performed in that church a few times, and
Okay.
they've turned it into a theater space.
Yes, they call it the Old Church Theater.
I have performed there for groups like the Parent Teachers Association and the post prom there. To me, it's an entire new life for that church. It's really beautiful, and they bring in tour buses to come see shows.
I need to tell you a little story about when we sold the building to the Arts Council. I had to call the bishop and get approval. The bishop wanted to know what we sold it for, and I said $2,000. I thought the bishop was absolutely going to swallow her tongue. $2,000? You can't do that. And so then I explained to her, we had an agreement with the Arts Council that they would keep the stained glass windows. And that was what we wanted to protect. And that was a part of the sales agreement that was signed. And they've adapted the inside of that church for their particular needs. but it's still the old church.
It's really, to me, a testament to a community not wanting to get rid of their history.
Yep.
And they have to adapt to it. And I think kind of, religious organizations are learning that piece by piece, that it's time to adapt to certain things. And that, we're living in a digital era where people are expecting, a printed bulletin every week, or the church to have a website or some kind of a social media presence. And that's how we can get the phone tree working to some extent. But you're also bucking against the members who've been there for a very long time.
Yeah. Because
not everybody uses Facebook. Not everybody, some people like the feel of a hymnal in their hand and looking up 256. And so it's a fight between the young and the old, but young doesn't necessarily mean young in age. It can just mean young in mind.
Spirit.
And old can mean traditional.
Yep.
So
or static.
Yes.
It can mean static versus growing or changing as time goes on.
Well, I challenged the church council about a year ago that they need to be thinking about what can this building that we have here, which is very functional for us, what can it become when the time arises that no longer is it going to be a church? And they've come up with some fairly good ideas. We'll see what happens down the road.
Do they, at one point they had a parsonage.
They still own a parsonage.
Do they?
But I don't live there. They rent it out, and it helps keep the doors open. Several years ago, they did a really smart thing. They raised some money and put it in a number of CDs. And over the years, the CDs have dwindled down, but they had this foundation that could help to fund the church. And little by little, that money has dwindled and probably is going to be gone in a couple of years or more.
Do you think that is not a unique situation to Hillsboro? It's something that's happening across.
It's happening all over. I know the pastor of the Methodist Church in Larimore is confronted by that same kind of situation, and I could list probably, if I just put my mind to it, probably at least a half a dozen churches in the eastern part of North Dakota that are the same way.
How much do you think that is either people finding different ways to either express or celebrate or observe their faith versus the things that we're seeing happen to a lot of small towns everywhere, not just the churches in the small towns, but schools where populations are dwindling, people are going to larger cities or other areas where more people get together. There are churches that, like in larger areas like Fargo or especially in Minneapolis, you can find churches where the population is huge.
Yeah.
And I wonder too, how much of what the small churches in smaller towns or smaller regions might be experiencing, just the fact that the younger generations don't tend to stick around to those places anymore.
No, I agree. And that's the major reason, is that younger generations find the church less relevant for their lives.
Okay.
Which is a sad commentary, but it's true. Now, in those churches where the local leaders will provide some upbeat music, provide some graphics on screens and that sort of thing, they're bringing in a few young people. But we've traveled down a road we've always done it that way. And a lot of churches aren't able to make an adjustment.
It is, and I'm sorry to interrupt you here, but just as another question along this line, do you find that younger generations want to celebrate ideas like love and empathy over scripture and verse over the history of words versus the meaning behind those words, if that makes sense.
I think I understand what you're saying. And it's, probably that's true. Yeah, I would say that probably.
It seems like there's a multitude of reasons, right? You can't really point to any one, but once you got them all, it's a perfect storm.
We can't say that there is a reason why, and it varies from community to community, I think. But
when you sit down to write a talk, how has it changed since 1979?
Okay. Well, for one thing, back in those days, I was just egotistical enough to think that my sermons were really wonderful, and I filed every one of them away. I don't know, probably, I would say probably 40 years ago, I pulled out some old sermons and I was going to resurrect them. And I wondered, boy, why did you think this was something special? And so now, for about 40 years, JJ, every time I finish using my sermon notes, which I'm not a slave to, but I've got them there to help me guide through. But every time I finish using them, when I come home, they go in this wastebasket right behind me. So
that's a good educator too. Is they know the outline of their syllabus, but they're not going to be a slave to it.
Yeah,
and so they're able to keep things fresh, and they understand that what's good for the class of 2018 is not necessarily great for the class of 2019.
Yeah. I usually talk to my younger brother, every Friday or Saturday. And his words of counsel every week are, now get in there and look at those sermon notes and kind of memorize them. You don't want to have the congregation look at you and see the top of your bald head.
If you from 2019 could sit down with you from 1979 and you could impart just a lesson, just specifically on sermon writing, what would be some tips you would give a younger you or even a younger pastor today?
I think the key is, first of all, don't take yourself too seriously. But beyond that, I do a tremendous amount of study every week on the passage that I'm going to use for a sermon. Most of the time, my sermons come from the lectionary, which is a schedule of readings for every Sunday of the year. And I make a decision usually 2 weeks before as to which sermon, which scripture I'm going to use for that particular, for example, I'd need to go back a few weeks. If we went back 2 weeks to the sermon that I preached then, you'd have to go back 2 weeks earlier than that, where I started my sermon preparation.
Okay.
And
you're good. You're good.
And I spend a lot of time in studying the background of that particular scripture. And then I begin to look for ways to find modern examples that would apply to that. There are some services online where you can find illustrations if you Google it. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but I learned to do that a few years ago. And man, there are tons of illustrations that you can use.
What about what's happening in the world around us? Do you find that affects?
Every Sunday, I try to bring some kind of event that is coming in. I had one of my members months ago, when I had a line that was innocent as could be in my sermon where I said, Jesus never built walls, he built bridges. Well, this guy told me that I was preaching a political sermon. I think maybe he felt a little guilty of the fact that that he was a supporter of a wall on the southern border. Let's just put it that way.
Sure. Yeah. It felt like you were
He
talking
thought I
directly
was-
to him.
Yeah, he thought I was picking on him.
Which is interesting that would ever enter somebody's thought in a place like a church, that they're being singled out and they're being talked down to in a way. And I don't think that would have happened in my grandparents' generation. My grandmother went to the First Presbyterian in Fargo when they moved out of Grandin after my grandfather died, and she never once. I remember one time being like, "Well, Grandma, she was the pastor was talking about you because they're talking about the elderly members of the church." She goes, "There are some young people who are elderly in our church." She was talking to everybody.
Yes, indeed. But it's a challenge every week to be able to say something relevant. And as far as that guy was concerned, the one that told me that I was being political, he said, "If I want to deal with politics, I'll stay home and watch TV." His wife came behind him and says, "Don't worry about him. He'll get over this." And sure enough, within the week, I had gotten a text message from something about a matter that was completely divorced from building walls or bridges.
Well, there you
So
go.
he got over it.
What are you excited to do after your fourth retirement?
Oh,
I can't imagine
Probably
devoting.
go find another parish somewhere and move and start over again. right?
no.
I mean, we've already discussed. You already have a lot of irons in the fire that
Yeah.
you're going to take up, but and I don't want to say the word losing something like this in your life, but being without this burden of a weekly sermon is a relief, as well as sort of, what do you do with yourself? You
Well-
talk about all this study that you do. Now you're going to have free time. Your wife's going to go nuts, Dale.
Well, that happened at the first retirement. She told me, she says, "You got to get yourself a hobby. You've been sitting around this house too long." And that's when I came up with the karaoke thing. But I will make myself available to pastors in the region. If you need me to come in and preach on a Sunday, I can do that for you. So I'll keep my hand in it. The hospitality thing that we're working on for Wesley Church in Grand Forks. Let's put it this way. I have two people on the committee that is developing this that are a whole lot smarter than I am. And I'm going to rely on them to do a lot of the work.
That's why I keep Tucker around too.
It is.
Did you ever find yourself at a time when you thought, I don't know if I want to continue with this any longer, or in the manner that you were? Did you ever think about getting, is there an office job equivalent with working with the church?
Well, yeah, that did happen to me back in the late 70s. I was divorced from my first wife. I got tired of little, I don't want to be sexist, but mostly they were little old ladies that wanted to know, why did you get your divorce? It wasn't any of their business.
Yeah.
And so finally I took a leave of absence. I had a friend who was a bird colonel chaplain in the Army. And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. And he said, why don't you come to Europe and be a religious education director for the Army? And I said, what do you have to do? And he said, well, you have to fill out the application, blah, blah, blah. I said, what if they don't accept me? He says, oh, they'll accept anybody. I told him, thanks for
Ringing
that.
endorsement. Yeah.
Yeah, a ringing endorsement. And so I spent 2 years in Germany. I worked with the chaplains, but I wasn't a chaplain. And that 2 years was a period of time in which I was sincerely trying to evaluate whether or not I wanted to continue in the parish ministry. And that's where when I said that it was a convoluted set of circumstances, that's how I got to North Dakota. One bishop that I had talked with about an appointment told me, he says, I just don't have anything for you. That bishop was talking to another bishop, and the other bishop that he was talking to was in North Dakota. And the Iowa bishop, the North Dakota bishop says, do you have any extra preachers? I need some up here. And the Iowa bishop said, funny you should ask. Yes, I know a person that you could call. And anyway, I got an invitation to come up and meet with the bishop and the district superintendents in North Dakota, and they seemed to like me, and I liked them, and the rest is history, as they say.
Oh, did you ever think that you would end up in North Dakota?
Oh, God, no.
Right? No, yeah, nobody thinks that.
Usually the people's response.
I'd been to North Dakota one time, and we went from Valentine, Nebraska on up in, and they were reworking. I think it's 83, Highway 83, maybe from Valentine.
Oh, yeah. That goes right up through Bismarck and then up to Minot after that?
Well, it goes into South Dakota and then on up into North Dakota. But we didn't know from Beans about what the highway condition was. We got in the middle of the night. We're driving on gravel road. They have torn out all the concrete. They're going to put in a new highway. But that was my introduction to the Dakotas. I had never been, I guess, to North Dakota, but we spent. We were kind of camping. We had an old Volkswagen bus. I don't even know if they make them anymore.
They do, I think. I think they make them.
Well, they're definitely collectible. I know people who spend a lot more than the original purchase price to restore those.
My first wife and my son and I, my son Joe, who's the older of my two sons, a middle child, we had gone to. We wanted to go to the Black Hills and to the what's it called? Where the painted rocks are.
The Badlands.
Badlands. Thank you. I was.
Took me a second too.
Yeah. Anyway, and we did, and we enjoyed our time there. We went back to Kansas another route. We did not want to go on that gravel road.
Yeah. I find it also interesting when people end up in North Dakota who weren't born here. Because I find the people who are born here, I think 99% of them choose to stay here.
Yeah.
But it is always interesting to talk to somebody else who's had an experience of another type of lifestyle coming here. Earlier, we were talking a little bit about sort of the larger city churches, and I have a real problem walking into a church that is the size of the Fargo Dome, and they've got a lot of space there that's not meant for worship of any kind. And I find them to be, I'm going to use the word hypocritical, because they talk to you about the need for giving to the church and for being a part of the church, and yet they've got a lot of locked doors. You can only use this room on certain days, or we pride ourselves on making 1,000 pancakes every Sunday.
We need the fanciest projectors for the big screens we're putting up.
Yeah,
and I have a lot of trouble being in there when the purpose of the church is less about the community and more about the flash.
Most of those churches have a personality that leads them. Some personalities are able to do it with grace and style. For example, Church of the Resurrection in Leawood, Kansas, which is a suburb of Kansas City. Adam Hamilton has been the only senior pastor they've ever had. Adam is a man of God, and he's a wonderful administrator. He has a staff now of, I think, about 20 pastors, associates. They have close to 10,000 people that worship either in the main church or in some of the satellite churches every weekend. But a lot of the personalities that lead some of these big churches are people who are very self-centered, and frankly, they turn me off.
Yeah. And I think that they attract other people who like that, who feel a status for being a part of that church.
Yeah.
When it becomes less about everyone who walks in here is equal, whereas everyone who walks in here, like, oh, I do business with that guy, I do business with that guy's company, and this is a networking opportunity that I get to bring my kids to.
Yeah.
I kind of get that feeling sometime from church, and that's why I don't go to a church in Fargo. Now, I'm a member of the First Presbyterian Church there, and I really like my church, and I do feel like they have a good sense of community. But I sleep in on Sundays. I've been to see you more often than I've been to see the pastor who taught my confirmation class.
You do realize I could count on one hand the times you've been in my class.
I know. And you should talk to my mother-in-law about the number of times I've been invited and I did not make it up there as well.
Well, your mother-in-law, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the go-to people. If I need to get something done, she's one of the two people that I would go to, and I don't need to worry about it getting done. They take the ball and they run with it, and I appreciate the dickens out of that.
And I'm inspired by her because she feels an obligation to the church that she can never fulfill. She can only devote as much time and energy as possible, but she'll never be able to give to the church what it's given back to her.
There are a lot of people like that, JJ, who want to try to do whatever they can for the church, but whatever they do, it's never enough. I just know that I have a deep appreciation of your mother-in-law.
She's a good person.
Yeah,
she's part of a group I call the Potluck Mafia, and I think every church at the church I went to growing up, it was called the Widows Society. And every time that there was a funeral or a special occasion, these were the women who planned out coffee, donuts, ham buns afterwards, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I've noticed that coming to Hillsboro, like on your annual meeting days, when there are women who they plan for a month in advance of what dish they're going to bring and what they're going to plan. So let's get down to the nitty gritty here. Okay. What's the best thing anyone has ever brought to a church potluck? The thing that you would look forward to every time and be like, I hope that Nancy brought those chocolate chip bars.
Got to be careful now. You could hurt some feelings.
It would be some kind of a hamburger and pasta dish.
Oh yeah.
You're living in the right part of the country.
Oh yeah.
Like the tube, the rolly tube pasta and the big hunk of tomato in the hamburger stuff. Is that what you're talking about?
That would be one. I'm not partial to a lot of different hamburger and pasta dishes. That's just one of my favorites.
See, now I'm fascinated by the notion of, you were talking earlier about how, working with a church where it's actually two different denominations entirely have combined to form a church. And I would assume that the potluck cultures at both places might have been slightly different, and that when they combined that maybe there was some interesting thing there. Have you noticed anything like that? Probably in the
early days, that difference would have been more noticeable.
Okay.
But they've gotten somewhat homogeneous.
Okay.
Like I said, most of the members of that church don't know whether they're fish or fowl, which means they don't know if they're United Methodists or United Church of Christ. Now, there are a few who know. One of my favorite people, and I had his funeral a couple of years after I came there. The first Sunday that I was there, he said, "Preacher, I want you to know how thrilled I am. We got a United Methodist for a pastor now." He also told me on maybe the next Sunday, "Preacher," he always called me preacher. He says, "Preacher, if you look out there and my eyes are closed, it doesn't mean I'm sleeping." I'm just thinking about what you're saying. And I never accused him of sleeping.
You know, when a lot of people, when they're kids and they decide what they want to be, or when they're trying to decide what they want to be, it's often because they've seen someone doing that, an adult in that role. So when you were young, was there a pastor or a person of God that was sort of the example for you that you thought, I want to be like that?
Yeah, there was, actually there were two of them, and they had names that were so similar that it was almost scary. One of them was Harold J. Camp, and the other one was J. Henry Capps. Now, if one of them is going to speak, you better make sure that you know which one it is. And the interesting thing is, both of them flew airplanes. They were private plane owners, and both of them prayed the most beautiful prayers I've ever heard. Now, I have another friend now. He's been my associate pastor for the last almost 6 months. Jerry Bass. Jerry Bass is another person that prays great prayers. The church council, when I began to have health issues, voted to invite Jerry to be my associate to help me get through to the June 30th date. And I've been so grateful for Jerry.
It's amazing when you connect with another person who shares a passion like you do. And how long has Jerry been at it?
Interestingly, Jerry he started out as a elementary teacher, and then he was a principal, and then a superintendent of schools, and then he got his Doctor of Education, and he taught at Oklahoma State University, and then came back to North Dakota and taught there. And at about age 55, maybe, he felt the call to the ministry. He went to seminary at Sioux Falls Seminary in South Dakota. And he served a number of years as pastor at Wesley Church here, which had been his home church in Grand Forks. It was interesting that the bishop sent him back to a place where he had been worshiping before. Mm-hmm. Doesn't happen very often.
I find that some of the best filmmakers and writers are people who did not intend on being filmmakers or writers. They went and they had a different life experience, and then they brought that experience into being a part of. Tucker and I had the chance to talk with Richard Edlin, who had worked on special effects in Star Wars and Indiana Jones.
Oh, yeah.
And he used his background as a Navy man to figure out how to rework some of these special effects. So when there's a scene where the spaceship is going along the Death Star, he goes, this was similar to like a tank run for them. And so it doesn't surprise me that somebody who has a background in something other than just religion would be able to bring a great message. I mean, you got your start in education, and he worked in education.
He's an excellent teacher. But he had been a college professor for years. He also is very good at PowerPoint, and I never did learn PowerPoint.
I still haven't learned it. Yeah,
I tried, but my PowerPoint illustrations usually came out blurry or something like that.
Did you ever find it difficult to lead your own life when you were also caring for your flock as well? Because I imagine that you had a lot of situations where you were dealing with people who are terminal with illness or who had felt that feeling of abandonment.
Yeah.
And that's quite the burden to help with the load.
Let me put it this way, JJ. The good pastors are people who are able to put aside their own needs and minister without reservation to the ones that they're caring for and the needs that they have. But there are a lot of pastors, I don't know what the percentage would be, but there are a number of pastors who are so self-centered that they can't really give of themselves to the flock that they're supposed to serve. I have always tried to be available for my people. Now, I have other ways of filling my bucket. But for me, if I'm going to be a pastor and a shepherd, I've got to take care of my people. And I've felt that from the very beginning.
There's a very old Christmas movie. It's one of those stop motion ones. And it's about a blind shepherd boy. And he's struck by lightning. And the sisters of this small church, the small rural church, bring him in and care for him. And they've got a little school, and then he becomes part of their Christmas pageant, and a snowflake on Christmas Eve lands on his face and restores his sight. It was the present he had asked for from God.
I love the story.
It's a great little story. And in it, there's a moment where he talks about how he was hurrying his sheep to all get underneath this tree. And they said, well, why did you get struck by lightning? He goes, because all the sheep were taking up the room under the tree, and I wanted them to be protected. And so I had to stand outside the shelter. And that, when you're talking about giving of yourself and, having to be there, that's immediately what comes to my mind, is the idea that this shepherd boy made sure his flock was taken care of before he was.
Well, isn't that sort of the lesson of unconditional love?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the love? When I have had instances where I've talked with people, typically of older generations, not always, but who have a religious faith that's very rigid, and it's very much rule based, and it's very much they might talk about unconditional love, but then they lay out an example of a God whose love seems to be very conditional. That you have to, practice this way in this day. This is your orientation. Yep. This is what you eat. This is how you talk. And it seems to me that is just completely missing the point. And I wonder, in your opinion, how do you think someone gets to that point where they see their understanding of what unconditional love is different than what I'm talking about?
Yeah. If they don't understand unconditional love, by the time they're adults, they're probably never going to learn it. It is something that becomes ingrained in you, and it generally doesn't happen just all of a sudden in your mid-adult life or whatever.
It's not like the Grinch where his heart grows 3 sizes in one night.
Yep.
That's not really how it works.
No. That's a nice story. Mm-hmm. But for most of us, it doesn't happen that way. Now, I think about my relationship with my 3 children when I tried to give as much as I could to the church, and it occurred to me one day that I was not giving the kind of time to my 3 children that I needed to do. So I started immediately. Once a week, I would take one of the kids out. We'd go to wherever they wanted to go for a meal. McDonald's, Chuck E. Cheese, whatever. And I would focus all my attention on that one child that week. It didn't take a whole lot of my time, but I've had a great relationship with my 3 children. And I know that would probably not have happened if I hadn't given them some time and focused in on them. But unconditional love it's hard for all of us. After the resurrection of Jesus, when he was on the beach and the disciples came in and they hadn't caught anything, and Jesus said, "Cast your nets over on the other side of the boat." And they did. I can hear them grousing, saying, "I've been a fisherman all my life. Jesus was never a fisherman. Why is he trying to tell me how to fish?" But they cast their nets on the other side of the boat, and they got so many fish they could hardly bring them in. And Jesus had prepared a fire, had some breakfast, and then he took Peter and walked down the beach. And Jesus says to Peter, "Peter, agape," which is Greek for, "Peter, do you love me with an unconditional love?" Now, Peter could only say, "Lord, philos," which is a kind of a brotherly love. 3 times Jesus asked Peter. Finally, Jesus said, after Peter said, "I can't give you that unconditional love," Jesus said, "Okay, Peter, then I understand." But, well, he didn't literally say that, but in essence, that's what he said. But Jesus was saying to Peter, "Give me what you can, and then I'll take it and work with it." But unconditional love is a concept that is much needed but seldom evidenced. Unconditional love means that regardless of what you do, I'm not gonna cast you aside. Unconditional love is what the Apostle Paul was writing to the church in Corinth in 1 Corinthians 13, when he said, "But the greatest of these is love. Now abide faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love." Paul was talking about unconditional love. But unconditional love is a hard thing to really bring about.
Do you feel like some people look at a church and a congregation and think that's the church, the people who are here and those who are in the phone tree for the church? But maybe what they should be looking at is, we are all members of a community. This is our grouping within the community, but we should all be serving each other in some way, shape, or form. I think of the work you started. There was a food pantry that you started.
Oh yeah, we started a blessing box.
Blessing box.
Yeah, the blessing box sits on the east door of the church. It has food items in there. In the wintertime, we have to make sure that we don't put anything that's going to be frozen. On the doors of the church of the blessing box, it says, "Take what you need and give what you can." Sometimes the food pantry is not open, but hunger knows no season. And if a family is hungry, or if they don't have any money to buy food at the grocery store, they can come to the blessing box. As far as we know, it has never been abused. And there are people that come with various kinds of things. Now, this time of year, we get a lot of macaroni and cheese. We get some canned goods of various sorts. But
it's not intended solely for the members of your church.
No.
It's meant for the community that the church serves.
Yeah.
Now
some people don't want to be a part of the community, and I understand that. Church community I'm talking about.
Sure.
But we just try to keep loving them.
That's a good way. That's a good way of thinking about it. The world could use a little bit more of that.
Indeed.
Just try to keep loving them.
Yeah.
As we wrap up, and thank you so much for giving of your time for this as well. We really appreciate it. And thank you again for inviting us into your personal home. And it took Tucker and I a little bit to get everything situated in here. So we got a good chance to chat. But one of the things that has really stuck out to me, and one of the reasons I wanted to have this chat with you before you retire for the fourth time, just shy of 60 years, just shy.
59 years
59
since I
years,
first got my license,
which is
preach.
amazing.
Yeah.
But one of the events that you held in Hillsboro that I was unable to attend was a day where you used holy humor, where the idea was, let's come together and let's laugh. I believe in the healing power of laughter. And I believe the fact that a smile and laughing is universal. It doesn't matter what language it is.
Yep.
Everyone understands it. And what gave you the idea to start something like that?
It wasn't my idea. Down through the years when I've been a pastor, I don't know that I've necessarily plagiarized, but if I hear about a good idea over here, I'll try to bring it into my people. Holy Humor Sunday, which is the first Sunday after Easter, is a time to make fun of the devil, because Jesus overcame what Satan tried to do. Satan thought that he had put Jesus totally out of commission. And so on Holy Humor Sunday, which has been since the Middle Ages, the church first started that.
Really?
If you were to Google Holy Humor Sunday, you'd find songs, you would find prayers, you would find all kinds of stuff that would be appropriate. The feature that my congregation at Hillsboro likes the best is we have a time for telling jokes. And people especially tell jokes that make fun of the devil. They like that.
I can believe that.
And you're saying this started
in the Middle Ages.
In the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fascinating to me.
It's not a universal kind of thing. One of the current best pastors with Holy Humor Sunday is a pastor at First Congregational Church in Fargo. Kevin, and boy, I can't think of Kevin's last name. I'm a total, but I want to give him credit for helping me with some songs that they are to familiar tunes, hymn tunes that the people know, but you've got words that are appropriate for the day. And they're fun times.
Any chance you remember one of your favorite jokes from man. And I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, so no worries if you can't think of it.
One that I don't remember who told this even, but this guy was sitting in church, and the devil came up to him and said, "Boo." The man didn't flinch. Devil said, "You know who I am?" "Yes, I know who you are," the man said. Devil said, "Don't you know you're supposed to be afraid of me?" "No, I'm not afraid of you. I'm married to your sister."
And I think that's the perfect place to end this. Dale, thank you so much for making some time for us.
Glad to help.
A huge thanks to Natalie Deutsch of Hatch Realty for sponsoring this podcast. Folks, if you're looking to buy or sell a home, contact Natalie Deutsch today, because Natalie Deutsch is not only a previous podcast guest, she's somebody who's going to care enough to sell your property for top dollar. She's also going to find you the best price possible if you're purchasing a new home. Last year on average, Natalie earned her clients $4,000 over list price on their homes and sold them faster than the market average. On average, Natalie's selling a home every 3.74 days. That's 2 homes a week. Those numbers don't lie. Find out why Natalie is one of the top agents in this entire market. Get a hold of her today, Natalie at hatchrealtyfm.com. You can also call 701-388-9338 or go on to livefargomorehead.com. That's livefargomorehead.com. Read all of her amazing reviews and then listen to her episode of JJ Meets World. Thanks again to Natalie Deutsch of Hatch Realty. That's going to wrap it up for today's show. If you enjoyed this episode of JJ Meets World and would like to help us continue to produce 2 new episodes every week, you can donate to our Patreon. Check out patreon.com/JJ Meets World and donate today. Even as little as $1 a month can go a long way. Visit our website at www.jjmeetsworld.com or hit up our social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all the sites the kids are using these days. If you'd like to stay up to date on new episodes of JJ Meets World, you can find us on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, YouTube, or wherever you consume the podcast that you love. JJ Meets World is produced every week by Tucker Lucas. You can find out more about Tucker's work by checking out www.moonbasemaria.com. If you want to get in touch with your host with the most, go to linebenders.com and you can find direct contact info for JJ. Which Star Trek is it where they talk to God? Because if I were a pastor, I would just quote that movie all the time. Like, that would be every sermon. And then he would finally like get a young person to be like, isn't that Star Wars? And I'll be like, yep. And then I'd never show up to that church again.